People don't know where to go to cultivate wisdom. I will ask my students, where do you go for information? They'll hold up their cell phones right away. Where do you go for knowledge? And they're sort of a little bit more suspicious. They'll say, well, the university science. And then I'll say, and where do you go for wisdom? And they don't have an answer.
John Vervaeke is a professor of cognitive science and Buddhist psychology at the University of Toronto. He is the creator of the internationally acclaimed lecture series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
There's no possibility of truth without trust.
Vervaeke's work merges science and spirituality and reaches into the past to understand the history of ideas. He has developed a set of practices to cultivate insight in the quest to regain meaning.
The deepest truths are not accessed by us unless we're willing to grow our personhood.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Well, John Vervaeke, it's such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders here at Dissident Dialogues.
Thank you, Jan. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, I've been following your work. You've, of course, been looking at the meaning crisis. I think you actually coined the term, and it's been making its way into our overall cultural zeitgeist, which is, I think, incredibly important. But let's start here. Why are we so obsessed with zombies?
So I think the work that I did with my two co-authors in the book we wrote, my two co-authors are Christopher Mastropietro and Philip Misevic. We wrote the book on zombies. We were basically arguing that the zombie is a new myth. And it's not that old. It's one of the rare new myths of the 20th century. And we argued that the zombie actually portrays, exemplifies the meaning crisis. If you think about the zombie, they lack a sense of meaning, but they're hungry for the organ that makes meaning. They like to eat brains, which is really weird, right? They move around, but they have no purpose. They have no goal. They drift. They hang out in groups, but there's no community. Right, and they're driven by this sort of insatiable need to consume that nevertheless never satisfies them. And so we thought, wow, why is this myth speaking to so many people, and why do they want all these shows and movies, and why do people go on zombie walks? And it's like, oh, because this is touching a nerve. It's doing what all great myth does. It gives people an image to take something that's otherwise inchoate in their experience and put it in front of them so they can look at it and go, yeah, that's what's happening right now.
I find it deeply disturbing that this is the case, right? Because if this apparition, if these monsters really exemplify how we in this manifestation of Western cultures somehow imagine ourselves, or somehow it speaks to our culture today, this is obviously highly problematic.
So there's a couple of times in The Walking Dead where they very famously say, we are the Walking Dead. Because the idea is the zombies are just, us, decayed and fallen apart and drifting and homeless. They're not like vampires and werewolves, right? They're us. And so the fact that we are now seeing ourselves through this image is very symptomatic of a lot of things that are happening for people. We've got this sort of spike in areas of affluence among the younger generation in suicide, and the age at which people are committing suicide is dropping into childhood. We've got a mental health crisis that seems to be just spinning out of control. We have a loneliness epidemic that is getting worse and worse measurably, decade by decade. The number of close friends people have is going down each decade, and on and on and on and on. I can give you more and more symptoms. We are losing a way of being in the world that supports human flourishing, and you can see all the symptoms of there's something going on that is putting us tremendously under stress, and the very fabrics by which we understand ourselves and each other in the world seems to be falling apart.
Well, and one of the things that I've become aware of through the pandemic time, right, is how callous people in power can be in some ways with other people's lives.
Yes. So the work of Porteous and Smith, we made use of this in the book, this notion of domicide, which is the killing of home, that people feel they don't have home. And one of the symptoms of Domicide is that people feel that they are becoming increasingly distant and disenfranchised from the people, the power holders. And so if more and more people feel that they have less and less connection, impact on the political system, the corporate system, the legal system, all of there's so the loneliness isn't just, you know, personal loneliness. It's this kind of cultural loneliness. This profound sense that, like, no, it doesn't matter if I'm here or not because I make no difference and nobody cares, right? And so I think it was really surprising. A lot of people thought I made Awakening from the Meaning Crisis during the pandemic. I made it 2 years before the pandemic, right? And people like, what? Because one of the things the pandemic did was just show how much Domicide people really have. When the busyness and distraction was removed and people were thrown back onto themselves and their own life, many of them panicked or went into despair, or relationships fell apart. It was very destructive, precisely because the pandemic just exemplified and magnified the meaning crisis. And you're right, the people in power in no way took this at all into consideration.
Well, and the policies magnified it.
We took one thing, sort of physiological health, and we made it paramount at the expense of everything else, which is a hallmark of the loss of rationality. A rational person understands that relationship is made of these inevitable, complex, nuanced, dynamical trade-offs. We're now seeing, you know, that there's this long-term negative consequences across many dimensions of people's lives that have been, you know, negatively affected by the way the policies were imposed and the way they were communicated too. People were not given a sense of participating in this. They were just mandated what to do.
You know, so let's come back to the meaning crisis. You know, some people describe, I think the term is, there was a religion-sized hole left in people's hearts as we became a more secularized society. That might not be the whole story. I know it isn't, because I've been reading a bit of your work, right? But that's part of it.
Yes.
Right.
I think it's a big part of it.
Right.
So we're using this term meaning, and we're using a metaphor. We're saying there's something about the way our lives, our experience is organized that is like the way a sentence is organized and means something about the world. Like if I say there's a cat over there, the sentence has a meaning, and it connects you to that situation so that you can determine what's real in that situation, whether or not it's true or false. And we say, oh, well, there's something about our lives that has that connectedness. Now, that's what it turns out people are talking about when they're talking about meaning life, is this sense of, well, there's a coherence to my life. My life hangs together in such a way that I feel that I'm deeply connected to myself, to other people, and the world. Now, the thing about that is, human cognition is so dynamic and complex. The processes that make that connectedness possible also make us perennially prone to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. So we need practices, and not just one practice. There's no panacea practice. We need a whole living system. I sometimes call it like an ecology of practices for ameliorating this, right? This self-deceptiveness. I'll use an older term, the foolishness of our lives, and enhancing the connectedness, the flourishing. We need a way of cultivating wisdom. And the problem is that for a very long time, the places that were like the gardeners, the tenders of these ecologies of practices, and homed them and gave them an overarching justifying worldview, were the religions. And as we've lost the religions for a lot of good reasons, by the way, what nevertheless has happened is we lost this baby with the bathwater. We've lost all of these ecologies of practices and a philosophical framework that helps people put it into their lives, so people don't know where to go to cultivate wisdom. I will ask my students, where do you go for information? They'll hold up their cell phones right away. Where do you go for knowledge? And they're sort of a little bit more suspicious. They'll say, well, the university science. And then I'll say, and where do you go for wisdom? And they don't have an answer. And so that's the whole. People sense that They're not connected. They're losing touch. They're beset by this self-destruct. I'm going to use this term in a technical sense, like the way the philosopher Frankfurt does. They're beset by bullshit. There's so much bullshit in their lives. There's so much bullshit in the media, but they don't know how to cut through it. They don't know how to train themselves. They don't know how to connect to other people. So as a group, they can cut through this and get at what's really going on. And so this is not optional. Wisdom isn't optional. So people struggle and they get into weird rabbit holes and they try this and they try that. And so they suffer. They suffer. So the loss of the religious worldview, what Peter Berger calls a sacred canopy, right, has opened people up to this pervasive sense that they're beset by they know not what, and they got a sense that something needs to be done, something's wrong, but they know not what it is and they know not how to address it.
You know, you're just reminding me of something that you articulate, which I thought was really interesting. The distinction between lying and BS.
Yes.
As you say it. Now, it's very interesting because lying, it turns out, is a lot simpler to deal with.
Yes.
But explain this to me.
Yeah, so this is deeply influenced by the work of Frankfurt, and he wrote the famous book, essay on bullshit. The liar is depending on your commitment to the truth. So if you believe something to be true, that will affect your behavior. So the liar tries to get you to believe something that isn't true by the very fact that you're committed to pursuing what you believe to be true. They will manipulate your behavior. That's very, very clear. Now the thing is, we have this metaphor, oh, well, that person's lying to themselves. Well, you can't really do that. You can't really say to yourself, hey, you know, believe this, even though it's not true. That's not how belief works. Belief isn't a voluntary act that way. But the bullshit artist isn't trying to manipulate you in terms of your commitment to the truth. The bullshit artist is trying to get you to be disinterested, right, in whether or not what's being said is true. They're trying to sort of unplug you from your commitment to the truth and plug you into what is something else that motivates your behavior. And that's how salient something is, how much it stands out, how catchy it is, how much it grabs your attention. This is how advertising works. You watch a shampoo commercial. This person is using the shampoo. For some reason, they're in this beautiful botanical situation and the sun is shining and they're happy. You know that's not true. You know it's not true, and they know you know it's not true, and it doesn't matter because they have made this wonderful emotional association with the product that makes it salient. So when you go into the store without realizing it, it jumps off the shelf at you and you buy the shampoo. And this is what bullshit is. It disconnects you from the truth and gets you caught up. This is why our social media is all about clickbait. It's all about salience. It's all about getting you not caring about the truth. And here's the important thing, Jan. You can't lie to yourself, but you can bullshit yourself. Because I can make something salient just by giving it my attention. And then my memory will remember that that was salient for me just because I paid attention to it. And so when I'm looking around, I'll be drawn back to that. And then it becomes more salient for me again. And then I get looped in and I slowly start to forget that there's other alternatives. There's other things to look at.
I find what you're saying very moving. I mean, in a, again, very disturbing way, because it, just struck me what a cesspool of BS we are stewing in. I mean, we are constantly assaulted. I mean, in fact, the whole project of information right now seems to be to push as much bullshit BS into the system as possible.
It is very easy if I can get you to stop caring about bringing careful, reflective attention and, dialogical conversation and thought about whether or not something is true, and instead get you, hey, look at how shiny that is. Look at how fast it is. Look at the rhythm. Look at the beat. Look at how much it's catching your attention. It is so much easier, faster, and effective to manipulate you and control you. And then the problem is, you start to do that with other people, because the only way you can get their attention in a market or a world that is beset by BS is by really pumping up the salience. I know this. I'm on YouTube and I'm constantly struggling with, okay, you have to make this accessible. You have to get people's attention. But it's like, yeah, but I don't want to do that at the expense of calling them to the careful attention and reflection that is needed for the pursuit of truth.
So you said something very profound just now, and I know this is, of course, central to your thinking as well. You mentioned this idea of a dialogical conversation. I'm going to get you to explain that to me in some detail. But the bottom line is that it's a relationship.
Yes.
It's a relationship that's forming. And what you're talking about here is the absence of that relationship. It's like a mirage of a relationship with these, sort of clicky.
It's like on social media where you have connections, but you don't have actual social relationships with people. So people pile up the number of connections they have, but they're not actually connected with.
Well, so this idea of a dialogical conversation. I mean, earlier today we were at a small private event, and you talked about how that is central to the process of real education, right? And so explain, and dialogical, explain to me exactly what that means. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and this goes towards the heart of education, and also towards the heart of how democracy is supposed to work. And when this gets undermined, both education and democracy get seriously undermined. So here's the basic idea, and there's lots of scientific evidence for this, and it's mounting. So have you ever noticed that if your friend is doing something sort of foolish, you can be so wise. You can say, hey, blah, 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 blah. You're doing that thing you do, and you're making that mistake, and but when it's you that's making the mistake, it's so hard for you to see your bias, right? So when you're outside someone's perspective, it's very easy to see the way that bias is, that perspective is biasing them. But when you're within a perspective, it's very hard to see it. So here's the thing. You are actually my best chance of me correcting my biases, and I am your best chance for you correcting your biases. And what we have to both do is commit to, we're going to trust each other, we're going to entrust ourselves to each other, and we're going to commit to a shared process. Instead of you and I'm right, you're wrong, or it's like, I want to get closer to the truth, and so I'm going to pay very careful attention to you on the understanding that you are probably seeing mistakes in my thinking that I can't see. And all I ask from you is that you do the same for me. And then together, what happens is we enter into this mutually reinforcing, opening up, self-correcting. We move together. We don't necessarily have to come into agreement, but we can both get to a place closer to the truth than we could get to on our own.
That's a real relationship.
Yes.
It's very interesting because you're kind of, codifying things which are just kind of natural or should be natural or are so basic to the human experience, right? But are absent for so many people, and I think leading precisely to all of these terrible statistics that you were citing earlier.
Well, that's
right?
Exactly it, Jan, because remember that meaning in life is actually a sense of connectedness, and I'm trying to get at the sense of the connectedness, not just being a simple you and I are here involved in some exchange. It's like no, I'm making a commitment to you, you're making a commitment to me, and we're both making a commitment to the relationship between us. And we're going to say it is going to take us places that we couldn't get to on our own, and we can't even foresee. Those life-changing conversations that you're in that take on a life of their own and take you beyond. I use a Latin word that is one of the proposed etymological origins for the word religion. It's a religio. It's a connectedness, this living connectedness that really makes us capable together of doing so much more than just exchanging viewpoints or me trying to convince you of mine and you convince me of yours.